Hey everyone, I'm Brett Kinsella. This is GAIN, the Generative AI News Rundown. It's where we bring out all the great news, the most important events in generative AI, and we break it all down for you. And today we have a lot of great stories. We're talking about SEO, we're talking about OpenAI economics, we're talking about Google, a lot of different things. And joining me for the show today, I have my colleague, Eric Schwartz, head writer at VoiceBot.ai.
Hey, excited to get through quite a lot.
Yeah, we do have a lot to do today. We should probably get right into it. But I will say, I feel like we were just here, Eric, 24 hours ago. We did a 3-hour session, LLM innovation. Over the next week or so, a lot of these videos are just going to start rolling out. We had Azure OpenAI service go into depth around OpenAI in the market. We talked to the head of Bing Chat, and how they wrangled GPT-4 and made it like functional for search. We talked to Amazon Bedrock, one of the leaders there, and talked about the Titan model, which almost nobody knows anything about. Galileo around metrics, Applause around testing. It was really great stuff. There's a lot of really interesting information there. So if you are not subscribed to the VoiceBot YouTube channel, I recommend people go there. Maybe Andrew, you can put that in the chat for us. That is going to be youtube.com/the @VoiceBot.ai. All those letters together. Okay, great. So you'll be able to see all those videos coming out pretty soon. I think it's going to be amazing. We'll talk about some of those topics as they get published. The other thing too is if you're on LinkedIn or you're on YouTube, give us a like, please, and let us know you're here. Just like jump into the comments really quickly and let us know you're here, where you're coming in from, and what you want. And what we tell everybody every week: make comments, ask questions, whatever. We'll try to do our best to incorporate that into the discussion today. I want to lead off with some news around OpenAI economics. And there's a couple of stories that have been playing around here as well. Now that companies are looking to get into production, they are starting to think about, cost might be a potential issue. And OpenAI is clearly not the cheapest of that. And OpenAI is sort of taking it from two angles. One is there are alternatives to OpenAI, which, for example, open source, which might be cheaper from a total cost of ownership standpoint. They're not really cheaper right now because setup and maintenance of those models and things like that probably altogether cost you a little bit more in the short term. But over time, when you don't have to pay all those inference costs, a really significant benefit. The other thing too is look at Azure OpenAI service. On Tuesday, Satya Nadella said that they now have 18,000 customers for Azure OpenAI service. Those are customers that it's like a direct competitor to OpenAI having those customers. Now, OpenAI gets paid something, but when Azure has the customer, they capture a lot more of the margin than OpenAI. And so OpenAI really benefits economically if they're there. And you see that some companies are doing both. Some are just doing Azure. Some are doing OpenAI. But I think this is one of the things we talked about with Mona Wellen yesterday, is that when people are moving to production, a lot of times they're going to go to Azure because they know a lot about scalability. Any thoughts about this OpenAI economics, Eric?
I'll just say, this is another sign that we're in a transition period for generative AI. There's the initial rush, there's the rapid adoption and proliferation of models and ideas and how to use it. And now the question is, all right, there's a lot to offer here. How do we pay for it? What's that system look like?
Absolutely. And it's related to another story that we had that we just ran a couple of days ago. And I'll sort of bring that up. And this is about the mythical Arrakis model. And so when ChatGPT first came out, one of the things they were looking at was how can we deliver this much less expensively? And they did a lot of infrastructure cost optimization, all these things, but they were also working on, I think it was basically a fine-tuned or slightly varied version of GPT 3.5 in order to run ChatGPT. And the idea there was it was going to be more efficient, lower cost, and all these things. But it didn't work. And so they wound up going with GPT-4 and a combination of GPT 3.5, and the Turbo came out. And I think some of the learnings from Turbo actually led them to, or actually some of the learnings from their Arrakis work probably wound up in the Turbo API. But again, OpenAI is fully aware of this, that there's a lot of cost associated with what they have. Turbo is actually pretty inexpensive from an inference standpoint compared to a lot of the other options on the market. But this is a super important topic that is starting to come up now because people are budgeting for next year. They're thinking about production systems, and it's going to come up a lot more in 2024.
Yeah, and it's again, talking about the shift in how people are thinking about the technology, the power was the be all end all originally, and now it's much less about how the question is much more about efficiency and about fine tuning and narrowly tailoring these models for specific roles, specific industries, really looking for that perfect intersection between power and efficiency, and certainly with regard to cost.
Yeah, and there's actually been some other reporting. The information's done a good job on this. Initially, they were, I think, really far behind and not understanding the economics, but they've gotten some good stories recently about this. And if we look at one of the reports that they had was that even the Bing team and some other Microsoft teams are trying to figure out, can they use other models that are not OpenAI models to save some money in operating these things? Because Microsoft obviously operates at a huge scale for all their products. And so any savings is really significant. And there's basically two countervailing forces coming on here. And so just to share this with folks in case they're not aware of it. So almost every company is at least trying OpenAI, or the executives sort of have permission to use it. OpenAI, it's like nobody gets fired if they use OpenAI. But at the same time, a lot of the folks who've been doing this a little bit longer, whether it's like Salesforce or Microsoft or somebody else, they've already sort of been through the thing. Okay, we know it works. We know how it works. We've learned a lot. Now we can moving into this. So we've got sort of the newer people coming in who are focused on OpenAI, whether through Azure or not. And that's the big thing, that OpenAI is just not going to generate as much revenue if it goes through Azure. It's not terrible for them, but it's not as good. And at the same time, we've got the people who have longer in the cycle who are basically saying, hey, how can I get off of this? So I just wanted to point that out to people. I think it's like a really important concept to keep track of, because it will drive the trends. I still think OpenAI's got huge advantages in this market, and whether it's through Azure or direct to the API, they have dominant mind share, dominant market share. And so their fight right now is going to be to get people into stickier applications, more impactful applications, keeping them running on ChatGPT and ChatGPT Enterprise, because those are really good revenue generators. And then fighting to maintain market share against all these things. And they do have smaller models, which are cheaper. And so a lot of the things that people are using sort of these other models for, actually a fine-tuned model for a narrow use case, and some of the smaller models might actually be a good thing. And so we have a couple comments here from Alan. How much power is good enough? And right is the right price versus quality in the price curve. Right. So Brad Abrams from Bing Chat said, hey, we're really focused on quality first for Bing Chat, but then we're going to figure out latency and price afterwards. They're not that they're not working on all of them, but they are working on all of them, but they want to establish quality first. And Alan talking about this being a big issue going forward. Hey, Alan, shout out to you for joining us today. Dave Urbanek also in the room. If you are here and watching, just give us a little shout out in the comments. Make comments, please. But let's move on, because we've got a lot of topics today. Another headliner for us is generative AI. Will generative AI search and SEO? And so will generative AI search kill traditional search and SEO at the same time? And this was based on a piece I put out over the weekend, a little bit more in-depth of analysis. And it was catalyzed by an article by a marketing professor out of Texas A&M, which I've had a chance to interact with a little bit, ask some follow-up questions in an email interview. And basically his assessment is that generative AI search is so much different than the traditional search that SEO consultants are just out of business. And it's going to be very soon. He thinks it's going to be a very quick transition. I don't necessarily agree fully with that. But if we think about it, there's a couple of different things happening at the same time. The first thing is traditional search is about to change, because when we search, what we want is an answer. We want a response. But what we get is a link, and the link then helps us find the response, but it's like one right after the other, right? So it's like, hey, here's something that allows you to be faster at getting your answer, but it's not the answer. Generative AI search gives you the answer. So that value proposition alone is going to really change what people like about search. And I think that's, the whole point that I put in here is 100% of the time with generative AI search, you get an answer, a direct answer. 11% of the time you get a direct answer in search, and 89% of the time you don't. So Google's trying to figure this out and sort of maintain traditional search, and Bing is doing this to a certain extent as well. We saw some of that yesterday with Brad. Maintain traditional search with generative AI as an overlay. But either way, if you're not in the answer, it's going to be difficult, right? And so SERP 1 below the generative AI answer is not going to be as good as SERP 1 best position today. And what traditional SEO consultants are doing is focused on that SERP 1. So that's like one of the key things that I think is going to change search. And then the other key thing then is this SEO consulting concept. And I sort of broke down what the professor said. And essentially his point is that the traditional search is going to change, and there will be some consulting work to be done in the place. But if you don't have AI expertise, if you're not software engineers, if you're not ML engineers, that your consultancy isn't going to be very successful in optimizing for position on this. And that's not what's resident in these SEO companies today.
Yeah. And I think to your point, the SEO consultancy industry, the job itself, it's not like it stayed the same, 20 years ago versus now. It's always been about evolving to reflect how the technology has improved and changed. But I guess the question is, will it be worthwhile being the first surfaced response in a generative AI chat if there's no link? And so, some of these chatbots have footnotes and links and either right in the answer itself or at the bottom of the response. But sometimes they don't. And if they don't, then it becomes a question of what's the point of being the one that being the source for the AI's response if you don't get any sort of even credit, let alone somebody going to your website.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it really does it is going to change search. We were talking to Brad Abrams about this, but I've had other conversations with people in the search industry, people who build search engines about this. And the way people have optimized for website and findability today is a little bit different, because the signals that the generative AI search, we'll call them algorithms in this case, but the LLMs are looking for is different. They're looking for something a little bit more. The other thing that's, I think, particularly interesting is that, and this was confirmed by somebody who builds one of the big search engines, is that the generative AI search actually gives more prominence to long tail elements than other search. So we've got, when you do a search, basically the system is just sort of averaging. It's saying you're most likely, this is the piece of the answer that's most likely to be useful to you, and then they're going to send you to a link that has that piece of the answer. But because the generative AI search oftentimes tends to try to give you a more robust answer, they'll mention 2 or 3 other things, because it might consult like 10 different articles or something like that and pull interesting things. So they'll say, sort of, here's your main thing, which is the same type of answer you would get. But here are 2 other things that are also interesting. And sometimes those are like really useful to people because they wouldn't have exposed otherwise. So there's like another thing there from a strategy standpoint. My verdict here is that if Google wins, if Google search generative experience, because it's like what people are familiar with, they're behaviorally, and it's like, and because of the way they're doing a transition is a more seamless transition between what we have today and what generative search is, that it won't change that much, because below the fold, you still have all your traditional search results, and SEO consultants can do that. And then they're just going to try to do the same type of thing they're doing to get people into answer boxes, or the featured snippets, which they call them, or the knowledge panels. They're going to say, hey, how do we get in there? And I think that could be something that actually helps them. And in fact, even in the near term, if it goes to more like a Bing chat, like the pure Bing chat or Perplexity, I still think there's more work for SEO consultants, because they're going to do some hand waving and say, yeah, we can help you get there. And, it'll take people months to figure out whether it's successful. The people that I think are really going to get hurt here are the SEO software companies, because this is really going to lead to very different types of analysis than what they've been doing today. And I think they're going to have less information to work on than they have in the past.
Yeah. And it's also the where the incentive for, obviously the search engine companies have always had an incentive to surface the best, most accurate links. But I feel like with generative AI chatbots, those incentives are even higher, because now it's not just a question of, do you have a link to something or not? It's, is your AI coming up with the hallucination or not being accurate? So if anything, Bing and so on, they have more impetus to find the sources and make sure that their AI chatbot is going to those accurate sources. I mean, we were talking about this yesterday. Was trying to make use an AI chatbot to make a list of parameters for different models, and the answers were all over the place. And without links, it's I had no idea what was accurate or not, and I ended up just having to use the traditional search engine to find the answers. So,
yeah, exactly. So Alan Forsberg says, the question is just how do we get the answer, but how do we get the answer in a way that drives traffic to us? And this was one of the things when answer boxes, the featured snippets first came out. So it's like, oh, is that just people get the answer? They're not going to go to my site. And then Google was very quick to say, oh no, you get higher lift. Essentially it's because you're SERP 1 then, that's it. Is it better than not having that? I think that's a different question. So I think that's like really important. The key thing is to be part of it and to be part of one of the first 3, I think, source citations. Because I've even seen this with a couple of the generative search things where they used to put, 3 or 5. Now it's like 3 plus a 4 others box, and it's like, and then you have to read all the way down.
And that's, I would say that's even before thinking about link rot, which is still an issue with regular search engines, let alone AI chatbots.
Exactly. So I do believe everyone's going to still try to do this, because even to be part of the answer is better than to be obscure and like never mentioned. And this is one of the reasons why I think all the news organizations eventually, regardless of what they're saying today, are going to come back. And like a lot of them have actually said that they are now asking the ChatGPT and Google bots not to crawl pages for generative. And I don't think that's going to last long, because their relevance is going to go down. They will not be able to take it. Right now, it's okay. They can get away with it because the use of generative search is very low. But as that changes, they're not going to be able to sustain it. Okay, let's move on to our next story. Measuring foundation model transparency. So if you don't know, there's a couple different organizations out of Stanford. A lot of people know HAI. So that's the human-centered, or the Institute on Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. And there's another one, Center for Research on Foundation Models. And they put together a 100-point transparency index for foundation models. And the first thing I'll say is the best thing about this is that it's super comprehensive. And so anybody thinking about transparency, they've got a long list to work from. And the thing I would also say is the worst thing about it is that it's super comprehensive. It's 100 points. Like, who's going to follow all 100 points? And, what we have here, as you can see, like, they created these 100 points. We'll talk just a little bit more about some of them. But I think this thing is going to collapse under its own weight for a couple of reasons. But one of which, like, okay, I'm a researcher. I created this thing. Who's more transparent? I would expect my hypothesis going in would be open models or open source models. And look at that. The first 2 are. But the third is actually the leading proprietary model that has provided the least amount of information, a lot of people believe. And that's OpenAI's GPT-4. So that's, I think this calls into question a little bit. And then you've got Stability AI, another open source model. And then we go into the proprietary models and sort of in the list of the 10 that they evaluated using this framework. So I'll just say a couple things about it. So first of all, it is actually kind of a cool list. Here's the list on the screen of sort of all the different things that they do, and they break it into 3 areas: upstream, the model, and then downstream. So it's a good pick list, but really it should be 10, no more than 15, because otherwise nobody's going to follow it. So that's the first thing. It's just like, if it's too many things, no one's going to try to meet all of them, because they can never get high enough on the score, because it just takes too much. The other thing is, it goes beyond things that actually help us determine if the models are safe. I think safe is sort of one of the big things. So for example, there's a whole section on labor practices. There's a couple of things around that, and maybe there's an indirect benefit there, and certainly there might be a social benefit, but it's not specifically around the model. I mean, I think this sort of goes beyond when we think about it. It's also like, which infrastructure and which infrastructure provider have you done? Essentially, what everybody in Stanford wants, who's an academic researcher, wants to be able to replicate everything 100%, third party. And I just don't think that's ever going to go anywhere. What are your thoughts?
No, I mean, I agree. And I also, I mean, the way the system is set up, it implies that being perfectly transparent is the best thing to be, and that it's a that it's that not transparent is bad, transparent is good. Whereas in reality, I mean, depending on the company or the project involved, you may not want to have the model be totally transparent because you don't want necessarily to have rivals or others be able to reverse engineer whatever you're doing that involved generative AI. You may want it to be a little more about discrete, I guess, partnership in that regard. And I guess it's also a question of how much does transparency translate to flexibility, to being able to customize models, and how much of it is just about numbers that are important certainly to the most technical level of developers, but aren't really important to project managers or executives at a company trying to work out what generative AI company or model to work to incorporate into their own systems.
Yeah, there's two things here. One is like what you don't want necessarily is regulators to sort of pick up on some stuff that are really impractical, and then they basically create a big disincentive for innovation. And that's what you're talking about. Like, why would I do this if I just have to like give all of the secrets away? And what we've seen is that OpenAI was one of the first to do this, but there's others as well who basically won't tell you what they train the data on. And I think that's actually in some ways, that's like the most important item that we've learned about recently is sort of what the data is. You usually want a lot of it and you want high quality, and that really differentiates model performance. But also that is the type of thing where I could say that, let's say you're a government regulator. I might want to know that because there's a lot of social and political aspects that might be relevant to that, that I would like to know. And so that makes more sense to me than like what do you allow the people who are working on this, like through your RLHF process, do you allow them to unionize? So I think that like that's a different set of questions, but it doesn't strike me as like what we need. Like, is that really transparency? Transparency is like what goes into the model to me and what comes out of the model, and are we transparent about those ideas, as opposed to how can I provide every piece of information so that someone else could totally replicate this?
Yeah, and it's also again, just because it's so comprehensive and because it's a 0 to 100 scale, it places a value on transparency that I don't think it's necessarily as important. I mean, I would be more interested in when it comes to training data. Can you guarantee that the training data won't lead to any legal issues in terms of intellectual property or copyright rules, or can you guarantee that the way it learns means that from my data means that it won't get filtered into the main model and then possibly be exposed to others, as we've seen happen already.
Yeah, and the other thing, by the way, more transparency, more openness also makes it more vulnerable from a security standpoint, because everybody knows all the inner workings then, and so then it's easier for people to exploit those inner workings. And so this is like a trade-off that like you don't care about if you're a researcher at Stanford, or maybe you do if you're a bureaucrat in the EU, but you don't, like, because you're like, it's not my problem. It's someone else has to work on that. But I'll just like point this other thing out. Say, okay, so we've got a couple open source models here, like Bloom, which is an open model, like they get 0% on risk and mitigations. It's because they don't provide any restrictions on use, right? And if there's no restrictions on use, they're going to be lower. And one of the things that I was really concerned about this as well is that people will just game the system. They'll answer a lot of the things that actually don't have the biggest impact, because there's no stratification in terms of like data source versus labor practice versus restrictive use policy. If they can just do all the ones that they think are not proprietary, and they'll get a higher score. And so it's just like going to lead to some perverse incentives. I think we can leave it at that. But I don't want it to be a rant, but I will say that it's really useful because it's just like they actually took time to look at all these things. It's a 130-page white paper. I've been through most of it, and they've done a nice job of defining different things. So from a pick list standpoint, I think it's like really good. I would suggest you consult it, and then you think about what subset of it is important to you, is if you're building a model or you're using a model. Okay, so let's go into Funding Fountain. We haven't done this. Oh, we got Alan wanted to chime in here, so if we don't have to backtrack, we'll just serious political questions related to labor practices. There are certainly parallels between what public domain works is it trained on and how much am I paying people to filter the data. Yeah, I think that's true. And I really believe that regulators might have interest in this. To me, it's not necessarily a transparency issue, though. Like, that's like a transparency of business practice. It's not specific to the AI model. Maybe there's some direct impact, but I don't see it. I see it's only at best indirect impacts on that. So, good comment. All right, let's go to the funding fountain because we got a lot of stuff to get through. All right, so this was super popular. We talked about Luiza. They took 10 million in funding. Okay, so what's Luiza? Luiza is a generative AI chatbot with a little bit of Llama, a little bit of mostly OpenAI behind it, and you can access it through Telegram and WhatsApp. And I tried out the WhatsApp. I thought it was pretty cool. Is it great? No, I can sort of tell like questions when it tries to throw it to Llama versus OpenAI. It doesn't come back as well. But I have heard a couple, since I wrote this, I heard a couple of points of feedback. One was very positive, that someone had tried it and they tried it in Spanish and Portuguese and they thought it was excellent, that they really liked it and sort of were really happy about the interface through WhatsApp. But someone else had told me that particularly in Brazil was one of the first points of traction because it started in Spain, added Portuguese, so for Portugal and Brazil, and then added English. And this 10 million is really to expand its English offering, which was the one I tested. They said it's because of the nonsensical answers, it's gotten a little bit of a bad reputation in Brazil. Although I don't really know. These are sort of low stakes. I don't know if people really care that much about it. Maybe it's just publicity for them. But the bigger thing that I was told is like, it's unclear like how this is economically feasible to run something through WhatsApp, because just to initiate any interaction between a business and a user in WhatsApp costs you 3 cents every day for every 24-hour period that person uses it. And so if you actually have high stickiness, and they claim to have 17 million people have used it so far, this gets really expensive fast. Then if you want to send any messages to them, that's an additional fee. So there's all these fees add up really significantly. And so there was some question about whether WhatsApp was even a viable platform going forward. But you wrote about this too. What's your read on Luiza?
Yeah, I think sometimes it is easy to take for granted the quality of English language AI chatbots, of both generative and non-generative AI chatbots. So when one is of, even when it's not perfect, if it's a good enough quality to be at least comparable to how the English ones operate, then that's a huge boon. I have a Brazilian friend who I asked to try it out, and he said it was far better than any other Portuguese language AI chatbot he's ever engaged with. So I mean, that right there, and the fact that it can recognize which language you're speaking and then respond in kind is pretty great. And also, I think that we talk about like the rapid adoption of generative AI in general, and while that is true on like a macro scale, on a consumer level, it's not a big thing at all yet. So, but what do a lot of people know how to use? They know how to use chatbots. They know how to use WhatsApp or Telegram, especially in Europe and South America. And I think that this is going to be the first exposure a lot of people have to what a generative AI chatbot is capable of, and open the door toward other adoption in the future.
Yeah. And I'll also point out that it is multimodal. You can actually ask it to make images for you as well. So here's an example of something you made. I think it's something.
It is several text image engines built in, it looks like.
Well, at least DALL-E. I don't know about the others.
It has Kandinsky as well.
Oh yeah, that's right. It does have Kandinsky. So I thought that was interesting. Alan said, so that's their expenses. What's their income? The funders must think they're going to make money somewhere. Yeah, of course. I think that if you have the most popular application on WhatsApp, there's probably a way to make money off of that. Maybe there's some sort of inline advertising. Maybe there's some sort of sponsoring that covers your daily costs or something like that. And you could flip it into a subscription model.
Well, and also this goes back to what we were talking about with search engines. If someone's comfortable with WhatsApp and not comfortable with the ChatGPT mobile app, and they say, "Hey, what's a good restaurant around this area?" and that restaurant is paid to be surfaced to the top.
Exactly. I think it's a really good question, because the economics of this are important. But until you get to scale, that's like a really important thing. And I actually sort of a little bit more sanguine about this than maybe my friend in Brazil said, like, the economics just don't work. I was like, yeah, you know what? If you build a big enough customer base, Meta will come in and recreate the solution and put you out of business. No, but you might be able to turn it into something, and maybe Telegram winds up being a better deal for them. Okay, so let's move on to our next story here. You wrote about CentML. They just raised $27 million.
Yeah, and I mean, it's coincidental, but it's amazing how many of these themes sort of tie together. We were just talking about efficiency and making reducing the computing power and therefore resources that it costs to run these kinds of models. And CentML is all about optimizing AI models, making them more efficient, making them run with fewer resources, both in terms of the computing power and in terms of the physical chips themselves, which again is another sort of logistical narrow point for generative AI. So they claim that they can keep the accuracy, increase the speed, reduce the cost without any of the they can do all these things without losing the benefits of generative AI. Specifically, they talk about with Llama 2, they say it can run triple speed even on like the last generation of GPUs. And as we've talked about many times, one reason that NVIDIA is just riding high this year is because there's so much demand for their chips and relatively few available. So any company that says, hey, you have these certain amount of chips already, we can make those run the kind of software you want, then yeah, you're going to get plenty of interest.
Yeah, and we talked about that yesterday too. NVIDIA presented at the Synthesia 4 LLM Innovation Showcase, and they talked about some open source software that they've developed that helps make their chips run more efficiently, that anybody can use, which is really useful. But yes, it's almost like in the first half of this year, the operating focus was what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
And the second half of this year, and mostly next year, it's going to be what's practical. And what's practical means, hey, I have business requirements, costs, user experience, latency, all these efficiency and productivity goals. So I think that's going to be an area for everyone here should really focus on next year. Okay. We also have Reality Defender raised $15 million to protect against deepfakes. What do we got going on here?
Yeah, and again, I mean, the issue of it doesn't really matter how great your AI is if it's hallucinating, or especially if it's something that can cause your business to lose money because you're not coming up with the
right protections.
Yeah, exactly. So Reality Defender is very much about spotting when people are using a deepfake, either an image or they claim text. Although, as you and I have talked about before, the question about spotting generative AI text is a whole other thing. But the idea that it can spot when there's a deepfake image or when there's other questionable issues or indicators of AI generated content, then yeah, that's a huge
this is really coming up. I mean, I think as of like last fall, I wrote about this idea that like the hype around the fear was a lot bigger than any type of harm or activity. And we've seen harm go up. And we're starting to see some activity as a little bit of a trailing indicator. I saw in the street.com pin drop CEO was featured, and they were talking about this idea that financial services really starting to think about the voice clones are so good. The some of the visuals for the video deepfakes as well are so good that a lot of enterprises are starting to think, geez, you know what? This is going to have to be part of our fraud detection stack or something else from a security standpoint. But a lot of times it's in fraud detection. And so I think this is going to be a lot better. Oh, and by the way, we actually have a report coming out next week on deepfakes. So we actually did a survey of 2,000 U.S. adults around their awareness of deepfakes and voice clones, their experience with them, their level of concern. We talked to them about in terms of their expectations around different industries, whether it be social media or banking or healthcare. So that's like a really in-depth report. It's over 60 pages, lots of charts and data in there. I think people will be interested. It's going to be like the most in-depth look at what the everyday people think about deepfakes. And a lot of it's actually very positive, but also with high concerns. And like the awareness numbers are much higher than I thought they were. So I recommend everybody watch out for that next week. And we'll probably talk about it here too. You should join us next week. That'll be certainly one of the things we cover off on.
Yeah.
All right.
I will
So
say one other thing is that Reality Defender is ahead of the game by being multimodal and recognizing that deepfake doesn't mean one thing; it means all the approaches.
yeah, I mean, if we think about deepfake, it shows up in audio, video, text, image, and so being able to look at all of those. I think is really useful, particularly if it's a consumer application. And so I think that's something that we haven't really seen, going forward. But like, is there a tool that you and I can use just to like automatically identify a phone call to us, which has the liveness score of the voice is low, or can we immediately look at a video online and it can detect whether it's deepfake or not? So I think that's going to be really interesting. I suspect though that most of the enterprises are going to start with a single mode at a time, because most of them are actually only doing voice for biometrics. The ones who are doing visual as well, it's like another one. So it's like, but yes, I agree that ultimately this is going to be all the above, and you and I both have talked about whether text is actually identifiable at this point or not, but it's a whole nother story. It's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up. You also wrote a story around Riffusion. We remember they came out, I think it was the end of November, December. They had this it was kind of an experiment where you could basically just like type in a different type of genre of music and it would automatically generate it. Like after whoever was previous to you in the queue, their section was done, it would play like 2 minutes of that and it would be all generated. What do you think? What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about going from seeing what's possible to seeing what's feasible or what's going to make money, and Riffusion is very much that. It went from a project involving not only creating a text to audio tool, but also creating a literal visual presentation of what that sound looks like. And now, the idea that it's not just going to be, little 10-second clips that are, kind of fun, but very, 1980s synth style, but now going to be at a professional level and useful for marketing and advertising. And, we've seen examples of some really impressive synthetic music generators from Meta, from Google. My favorite is definitely how Google claimed theirs is so good that they can't actually they can only show some demos of it because it's too good and people would misuse it immediately. But Riffusion, I played around with it. It's pretty great, and for on a consumer level, the applications are obvious. Like if I were a Twitch streamer, like that's exactly what I would be using to make my theme music or my background music. And I think they said they've made 50,000 riffs already. I think they're going to get a lot more very soon.
Yeah. Might be an unpopular opinion. I think this is super niche. So I don't think this is going to change the world, but it will be very common. And maybe not surprising that Google has something great, but they won't let anyone use it. I just they drive me nuts sometimes because they've got all this amazing technology and they just won't let people use it. And they kind of say, oh, it's just too dangerous. And then someone else comes in. And so the half-ass stuff gains all the market share.
Well, and remember, I mean, that's what they basically had, essentially a version of ChatGPT deep in their labs that they were like, 5 years from now, that'll come out.
I was using it.
Yeah,
it was in test kitchen. It was very limited in what they allowed you to use. But okay. Hey, folks, this is Gain, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week. We actually missed last week. It was the first week in 37 weeks that we'd missed it, but just logistics didn't work out. And so now we're trying to do 2 weeks in one. So I hope you enjoy this rapid fire edition. Let us know where you are if you're online. Just let us know where you're in from, and feel free to make comments. We try to do this every Thursday at 11 a.m. But even this week, 11 a.m. Eastern. But even this week we're an hour later. So it's a busy world out there. Okay, so I want to go into the product garden. So we got the funding fountain and the product garden. All right, Midjourney. You wrote a story about their first mobile app, but it's really not Midjourney's mobile app. It's a little bit different. So give us the swing there.
Yeah, so Midjourney, was very much the sort of gold standard for synthetic images for a while, to the point where they had to restrict usage because, again, talking about how much in terms of resources were being used and also potential misuse, but they've been very popular in Asia and Japan, especially because of how good their synthetic images in the style of anime have been. Apparently, just a huge a market for that. And so they worked with a Japanese company to create an app that's designed mainly to be about creating stories, like comic books and visual stories in the style of anime. But because it is still using Midjourney's models, you can theoretically just treat it like a mobile version of Midjourney and make things in any style you want. But it's aimed at a specific group, and they're going for a subscription service. So $10 a month or $96 a year, which if you're someone who really enjoys creating images with Midjourney, then that's a bargain, especially because you can do it on the go.
It's only, but is it limited to anime?
No, it's not. It's theoretically limited to anime. They call it NJI or Niji style because that's the company. But it's if you write out that you want it in a different style, it's going to do it in a different style. It's just you can't. At least this version it's not restricted. It's not a limited version of Midjourney V5 that way. It is just a normal Midjourney model.
And can you upscale?
Well, that's the big question. I don't know how much it can be used in an enterprise setting because it's still a mobile app. It's still aimed at the consumer market. But that said, Midjourney says that they have a mobile app in the works, and they're going to make it more of a something that could be used on a consumer or potentially enterprise level. But we'll see.
I think Midjourney, a lot of people think that companies making money hand over fist, one of the most profitable cash machines in the generative AI space. I don't know for sure, but they do have a lot of users.
16 million community members in the Discord.
And you have to, and so and I'm in there and I don't pay, or maybe I do. I don't remember. But there are people in there who don't pay. But there are millions of people who are paying between $10 and $30 a month. Actually, I think they may even hire. Might have a $50 version now too. But it's. It's really good. They've got a big user base. But I think it's really interesting too that now they have an API option, or in theory, an API option for special partners. So that's going to just be a whole nother way for them to generate income. Very interesting. Okay, so now we have a trio of stories from our friends at Google. This was quite a bit ago. It was like maybe 10 days or more ago. But wanted to make sure that we talked about it. So Google has come in and they said, hey, we're going to provide broad indemnity for our generative AI services. And it's not just like images. We've seen some around images. They're going to provide it also for written content. And part of this, I think, is a reaction to, their customers. A lot of, they even say this, people are, however, we've heard from many of you that while your company appreciates our general services indemnity, you would like explicit clarifications with regards to the training data behind the Google models and those services leverage. We're happy to provide this reassurance. So I think one of the things Google's saying is we already have some indemnity for you in terms of using our services, that we're not providing you with something that we shouldn't be providing you with. It's not protected from a rights standpoint. But they're saying, hey, now they've made something very explicit. Now they're saying this at the same time they're clarifying it. So in other words, I think they're saying, hey, we're providing you more protection, but really they're providing you the same protection, but they're also making some exceptions. And so I think it's really interesting. It's like a PSA, right? I just want people to be aware of this. It's I don't have any problem with the way they're doing indemnity. I think it's a really good idea that they make it explicit. If you're using Duet AI, if you're using Vertex, if you're using visual captioning, if you're using Cody, they're saying, hey, indemnity covers you. However, there are some exceptions. BARD and SGE are not included in the list. And the reason why is anything that's in beta is not included. So that's really important. Now, maybe when they are not in beta any longer, they will make it to this list, but they've done a list. So if they're not on the list, you're not covered. And that I think might be really important. And I think about BARD and SGE as maybe being, super important to the Google product set and potentially super important to some enterprise customers.
Yeah. And it's also, there's it's not a map. It doesn't map one-to-one exactly, but there's the corporate structure side of it where these are Google Cloud products. This isn't like a Google search or Google Assistant or Google Bard. It's Vertex, which is from Google Cloud. It's Duet, which is mostly a Google Cloud related product. Certainly, it's treated that way by when they do their announcements, and same with with Cody, the API. I mean, so it might just be about who or which executives are putting out these indemnifications, and maybe it'll expand.
It is. Absolutely. Like Sissy Howe runs the groups that do search and Bard and Google Assistant, or Bard and Google Assistant. I'm not sure what her relationship is with search. Actually, I have to. I'll back off on that. But in any event, like she was not part of that piece. There's but there is general indemnity. I think, but what they've actually said with Google Cloud in particular is that anything that's not general availability is not covered. And so a lot of the things that we're all playing with right now are not general availability. And so Google Cloud was doing this. So I expect to see more things come out. So just people should be aware of it. There is one of the barriers to adoption we're seeing right now is people worried about using some of these models, not just from safety and security standpoint, but they don't want lawsuits down the road that they use something that was protected, or supposedly private data because they got it from a Google model. So Google, Adobe, Shutterstock, I mean, they're all just Getty, they're trying to remove barriers to adoption.
Yeah, okay. I think, I think indemnity and lawsuit stories are going to go hand in hand for a long time.
All right, next one. Google Search rolls out AI-powered speaking practice for language learners. In other words, is this a threat to Duolingo? What do you think, Eric?
I don't think it's a threat to Duolingo, at least right now. This feels very much like a more advanced version of sometimes Google's Area 120 will throw out an interesting project that's not commercial or it doesn't seem to be valuable to them, so it's just a fun free thing. But it is a really cool tool. The idea being that if you're looking up a translation into English, especially, then it will the Google will say, well, here's how you say it, and you can practice saying it, and you can start. You can do a daily session, again, like Duolingo, where you practice speaking in English and using Google's conversational AI and voice AI abilities to detect what you're saying, how well you're saying it, what you need to change in your pronunciation to be accurate. It's really useful.
I think it's clever. I think it'll be like very niche. If you really want to learn a language, go to something to learn a language. But I think it's cool. You can already hear how things are pronounced if you do Google Translate. But layering on this idea that like you can speak and it'll evaluate you, and like I think it's like a really good idea. Whether Google should be doing this or in this way, I don't really know. But
well, enough. And if you link it to one of the features that I personally it feels the super sci-fi to me in a way that I really love is the Google, like you hold up your camera and it will just translate words into your language just by looking through your camera lens, and then you can link that to learning how to pronounce those words.
Yeah, that actually like that is aligned. I think Google should do that. Okay, another Google thing. This was a couple weeks ago as well, but we didn't cover it in an earlier game, so I wanted to. Search generative experience with Google. You can create images. Like I talk about this idea of why is this not in Bard, which is like kind of insane that it's not in Bard yet. It should be, but it is kind of useful. At first, I think like this idea, like why would I go to Google to generate an image? Like, you've got Bing Create. Like it's also sort of weird, although they've now integrated that into Bing Chat, which is sort of the alternative to. Now, is it the alternative to Google SGE or to Bard? We'll move on from that one for a moment. Maybe we'll do something special. But you can basically create this capybara and all these things. So I'm not sure if that like makes a ton of sense for people. I'm sure it's useful to have it out there. The thing I thought was really interesting is if you're doing an image search, you're looking for an image, this idea that they would put it in context, like one of the tiles would be create your own based on what you've searched. I thought that was actually kind of cool. And that is in context, and it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and I do like how it's not just creating an image; it embeds the editing option, so you can say like, "Oh, that's actually really close to what I want, but I need to change a few details," and it'll let you just build off that. And I like, and also, I mean, going back to what we were talking about with deepfakes, this isn't necessarily about fraud, but I do like how proactively it includes if you're using one of those images, the metadata indicates that it is AI generated, so there's no question of somebody claiming that you're using their photo or something.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, let's do rapid fire on a few more here because we're covering a lot of ground today. I think it's great. You wrote a story about a week ago about ERNIE 4.0, and it is Baidu's rival to GPT-4.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, we have a an American bias or English language bias certainly for these kinds of things, but the Chinese tech giants have a lot of resources and are putting a lot of effort into their generative AI works, and BAIDU has been rapidly catching up in terms of coming up with an ERNIE bot, the ChatGPT kind of thing, and now ERNIE 4.0, they say that it's just as good as GPT-4. They talk about how it's in some ways even faster, especially when it comes to video and sort of the multimodal concepts. And I think that there's always this sort of parallel tech ecosystem in China, and I think that this is BAIDU saying, it's going to keep happening.
If anyone watched Silicon Valley back in the day, there was this whole thing where Chen Yang would basically take every big company in the U.S. that's been successful tech company, and they would say Chinese version of, Chinese version of, Chinese version of. So Chinese version of Pied Piper being one of them, if people get that reference. But yes, and the fact is, it's a giant market. No one else is serving it very effectively, and BAIDU, they're the Google of China, and they've been working on these things for a long time as well. So not surprising to me that they've been working on ERNIE for a long time. The numbers I see around usage and quality, I think, are very high. I have no way to verify them, but they look good, and so I just assume that probably is the leading solution in China. So worthwhile to say that they're making more advances.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be competition from Alibaba, Tencent, and so on, but I think at the core, it's going to be right now. BAIDU is in the sort of Microsoft position of taking the lead in generative AI.
Okay, you got 30 seconds. Tell me about generative AI, Qualcomm, new chips.
Qualcomm is usually spoken of in the same breath as NVIDIA, but has sort of been not as much in the conversation when it comes to the generative AI chips. But there's so much demand that Qualcomm, and there's so much demand for AI chips, and Qualcomm obviously wants to be seen as a source. So they have both a PC, sort of PC desktop version of a new chip and a mobile version of a new chip that's going to be used in Android. That is just very centered on generative AI and its capabilities, and will lead to some genuine upgrades to how computers operate with regards to generative AI.
And you talked a couple of weeks ago about how generative AI is now, helping drive new revenue in the chip market. Okay, you also wrote about Deutsche Telekom and SK Telecom. They have a customer service LLM. What?
Yes. So SK Telecom, they've been very vocal in wanting to create LLMs. They invested a ton of money into Anthropic. They're really keen on the sort of industry-specific LLM approach, and now they're working with Deutsche Telekom, which of course is a giant in Germany and other parts of Europe, and they want to have essentially a shared base model for all their various telecom subsidiaries for customer service. And obviously, customer service is a very big deal when it comes to telecommunications. So if they have their own proprietary model, they don't have to rely on anyone else. Except each other and presumably Anthropic or some other partner.
But is it Anthropic?
Well, it's not said to be Anthropic per se, or at least not only Anthropic, but SK Telecom has put a lot of money into Anthropic, so I'd be very surprised if there's not.
They did that announcement not too long ago, and Deutsche Telekom was part of it. So, and maybe it's a blend of both, maybe different use cases. But I thought that was interesting that they came out with their own. NVIDIA is leveraging GPT-4 for robot training.
Yeah, and so this is sort of the extra step backward from, it's not just using AI as a training tool or using human conversation to train an AI. It's now an AI has been trained well enough to become a teacher itself and teaching robots how to make complex physical movements and then code those programs into the robots. And those videos are really amazing. It's like the first time that they've ever had a robot that can do the pen trick of rolling a pen across your fingers and opening and closing drawers, and really just speeding up and making robots much better at learning new tasks.
Well, large language models may not be AGI, but they are pretty freaking amazing at all the applications. People have really underestimated how broadly they could be used. We've got a couple more stories. I think I'll just save them until next week because I want to get to winners and losers. But I do want to do one more story before we close, because you wrote about the New York City mayor. We'll go back to deepfakes and voice clones and those types of things. Used a voice clone for robocalls. Is the apocalypse here when we have voice clone robocalls?
No, it's a really great thing with one caveat, essentially, which is that, so the mayor in order to encourage people to go to a hiring fair, they made a voice clone of Mayor Eric Adams. So they made a voice clone of his voice and had it speak in multiple languages. So people who speak, Hindi or whatever would answer the phone and they'd hear the mayor speaking Hindi and telling them, hey, there's a hiring conference nearby. If you're looking for a job, there's a bunch of companies you go to. And so for those who don't speak English or don't speak English fluently, it's not their native language, suddenly they're getting these opportunities to learn about things in the city that they might otherwise miss. And, I don't think there's any issue with, is that a good idea? The question is it become more of a ethical campaigning issue if suddenly, because according to the mayor, people think he speaks Mandarin and stop him on the street and say he speaks Mandarin really well. And obviously he doesn't. And the question is, is this an in-kind campaign donation by making him seem much more invested in learning all of the languages of the people who live in New York than more than he actually does. And he's not pretending to speak it when people ask him, but it's a sort of implied thing that people hear the robocall say.
Yeah. I mean, the public good may outweigh any downside.
Yeah, but if it were just a public servant who only had to record a call once in English and then it could be said in 20 languages, that's great.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it's more powerful too coming from him because people know his voice and things like that. So I think there's a lot. And we had AI Yoon in South Korea, that.
Yes,
the president.
But AI Yoon always said he was AI.
Well, true. He was called AI Yoon. That's true. But he had an avatar, which was cool. Okay. Let's go with winners and losers of the week. I'm going to start out with a loser, and you can do your loser after me. I think Google, and the reason why is we didn't talk about it today. There was a leak around some new features coming to Maker Studio, and we're going to write about it. Like we haven't even written about it yet. Nobody cares. It's like crickets. Like we see some things, and maybe it'll get bigger, and maybe when they do the formal announcement, it'll be. But I'm just wondering if people just aren't paying that much attention, because if that same thing had come out around OpenAI, if it come out around Anthropic, I think people would have been all over it. But I don't know your perspective, or actually, you don't even have to give an perspective. What's your loser for the week?
I think I'm gonna have to say my loser for the week would be. I guess I'd have to say photographers, because we mentioned a couple of them, but there's been more than a few new synthetic image engines coming out from between Square and Shutterstock and even Amazon, and suddenly this really valuable skill, it's genuinely very valuable. Those, a subscription to some of those stock libraries is not cheap, but suddenly it seems like, oh well, thank you for helping build our training data set, but now we're done with you.
Okay, great. My winner this week will be Spanish and Portuguese speakers who want a sort of a chat bot, and the fact that it's available on WhatsApp and Telegram, I think is great. Whether the economic model works or not, remains to be seen, but just making it available to people, and, to hear what you said and what some other people have said about how they thought it was very good, so that we're not just English language first for everything. To me is a really good outcome. How about you? What is your winner of the week?
I think we have to say people who work in marketing, especially for small businesses. I mean, we didn't even touch on them. There's so many other stories, but Amazon has a new tool for helping make better advertising. Square put out a bunch of new tools for making everything from menus to marketing manuals. It mentioned Riffusion coming out there, so now you can do the audio for some of these
elevator music for free.
Yeah, it's YouTube has new tools for connecting brands with viral moments. There's a lot of new and genuinely kind of exciting ways to get attention for products and brands.
Awesome. All right, let's wrap it up for this week then. Hey, everybody, I'm Brett Kinsella. I am the founder of Synthedia and VoiceBot.ai. That's Eric. He's the head writer of VoiceBot.ai. We've been doing this now since the beginning of the year. We do the rundown for you. What is the top generative AI news? I hope you have enjoyed this. It gives a simple way for you to do it. We try to do this every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Sometimes it changes around. So follow us on LinkedIn, follow the YouTube channel so you can get the updates. And we're going to make a way for people to actually get on people have asked us for this. Get on a mailing list so that you can know that when we're going to go live with this. But hopefully this is really helpful to you. You'll be able to see this. If you miss part of it, you'll be able to see it in your YouTube channel afterwards, or actually in the VoiceBot podcast probably next week. Until next week, bye bye everyone.